In the long river of Chinese history, no name incites more debate and complexity than Qin Shi Huang. He was the emperor of the ages, who ended 5 centuries of warfare and created the great unified state. He was also the tyrant of harsh laws who burned books and buried scholars. He lived in an era woven from blood and fire. The authority of the Zhou Son of Heaven had crumbled. Feudal lords carved up the land, and the 7 warring states were locked in a struggle for supremacy. Years of incessant warfare left the lands of China scarred and broken. The people, struggling under endless slaughter and servitude, yearned for an order of peace and stability. He, Ying Zheng, answered the call of history. In a mere 10 years, he swept away the 6 rival states and established the first centralized, unified dynasty in Chinese history. The systems he created were like a powerful set of genes, deeply embedded into the body of Chinese civilization, their influence enduring for over 2,000 years, even to this day. Yet, why did this seemingly indestructible empire collapse in just 15 short years? What did he do right to conquer the world? And what did he do wrong to cause his dynasty to fall with only its 2nd emperor? Today, let us part the mists of history and step into the world of this legendary emperor, Ying Zheng, to explore the glorious achievements of his unification of China and the dual legacy of creation and destruction that he left behind. Qin Shi Huang's success was not his alone. He stood on the shoulders of giants. The state of Qin he inherited had, over a century earlier, been forged into a highly efficient agriculture and war machine through one of the most thorough social reforms in Chinese history, the reforms of Shang Yang. The core of Shang Yang's reforms was twofold: enriching the state and strengthening the military. Economically, he abolished the Welzan field system and opened up the Chenmo Qin footpaths, legally recognizing the private ownership of land. He vigorously promoted a policy of valuing agriculture and suppressing commerce, directing all the state's resources toward agricultural production. This provided a continuous supply of material resources for warfare. Militarily, he established a revolutionary military meritocracy system, decreeing that titles and official posts, regardless of birth, must be earned through military achievement. On the battlefield, beheading one enemy soldier could earn a promotion of 1 rank in nobility and a grant of land. This blatant incentive system completely shattered the hereditary privileges of the aristocracy and transformed the Qin army into a tiger and wolf force, hungry for a chance to change their destiny through war. In terms of social control, Shang Yang established a strict household registration system and implemented the system of collective responsibility, where 5 or 10 households were organized into a single unit. They were to supervise each other, and if one person committed a crime, the neighbors would be punished alongside them. This grid-Zan-like management allowed state power to penetrate to the most basic level of society, ensuring a stable source of soldiers and taxes. At the same time, a crucial idea was maturing in the intellectual circles of the late Warring States period: the concept of great unification. The Confucian philosopher Mencius proposed that only through unification could the world find peace. Xunzi, another Confucian, absorbed legalist ideas and advocated for exalting ritual and valuing law, envisioning a model of governance suited for a unified monarchy. The legalists were the most direct proponents of unification. Han Feizi argued for unifying all through law, believing that power must be highly centralized. Even at the Qin court, the Chancellor Le Buli commissioned the Elishi Chunqiu, an encyclopedia that blended various schools of thought to argue for the rationality of unifying all under heaven. The Yin Zhenyang school theorist Zhu Yan provided a mystical justification, claiming that Qin, representing the virtue of water, was destined by heaven to replace the Zhou dynasty's virtue of fire. In Arsemba BCE, the young king Ying Zheng purged his court of powerful ministers and formally took the reins of power. He held the vast power accumulated by his predecessors. His heart was filled with the era's dream of unifying all under heaven, and he was surrounded by top talents from various states, such as Li Si from Chu and Wei Liao from Wei. Under his leadership, a meticulously planned and unstoppable war of unification was about to begin. Facing the threat of an alliance of the eastern states, Qin Shi Huang adopted the grand strategy formulated by Chancellor Li Si and others. Befriend distant states and attack nearby ones. The tactic was clear and ruthless. Use money and diplomacy to placate the farthest states of Qi and Yan, keep Wei and Chu in check, and then concentrate superior forces to eliminate the closest and weakest states, first peeling them away one by one like an onion. First, the annihilation of Han Arsenian BCE, the weakest state. Han guarded the throat of Qin's eastward expansion and became the primary target. The Qin general Ne Shiteng led a swift campaign, capturing its capital Xinjiang and taking King and of Han prisoner. Second, the destruction of Zhao, Ba BCE. The path to destroying Zhao was fraught with difficulty. The great Zhao general Li Mu was a huge obstacle to Qin's eastward march, having twice defeated Qin's forces. In Zhou BCE, Qin launched a final offensive, but was again blocked by Li Mu's strong defense. Unable to break through on the battlefield, the Qin general Wang Jian resorted to espionage, heavily bribing a favored courtier of the king of Zhao to slander Li Mu as a traitor. The foolish king tore down his own Great Wall by executing this last great general of the warring states period. With Li Mu dead, the gates of Zhao were wide open, and Qin's army swept through, capturing the capital, Handan. Third, the conquest of Wei, Wu BCE, facing the formidable walls of the Wei capital, Daliang. The Qin general Wang Ben, unable to take it by force, diverted the waters of the Yellow River and the Honggu Canal to flood the city. 3 months later, the city was submerged, and King Jia of Wei was forced to surrender. Fourth, the subjugation of Chu, Sen BCE. This was the most difficult campaign. King Zheng of Qin initially underestimated his opponent, asking his generals how many troops were needed. The young general Li Xin boasted no more than Ardin Lintin M in N. The veteran general Wang Jian, however, cautiously stated, "It cannot be done with less than Lieutenant Hinten Qin." The king sided with Li Xin, but his army was ambushed by the Chu general Shang Yang and suffered a disastrous defeat. This failure sobered the king. He personally apologized to Wang Jian and gave him command of a Liu-Chen-Nindian strong army, the full might of the nation. Wang Jian adopted a patient strategy of attrition, holding his position for a year until the Chu army's morale waned. He then launched an all-Dan-out attack, crushing the Chu forces and capturing their king. Fifth, the taking of Yan BCE. After Crown Prince Dan of Yan sent the assassin Jing Qi in a failed attempt on the king's life. War was inevitable. Qin's army broke through the capital of Yan, and King Shi fled to Liaodong, where he was later captured by the Qin general Wang Ben. 6th, the fall of Qi Yao BCE. Under the influence of its pro-Zhen chancellor, Qi had stood by and watched as the other 5 states fell. By the time the 5 states were gone, Qi was an isolated island. Qin's army marched on its capital, and King Jian of Qi surrendered without a fight. In a mere 10 years, the world that had been divided for 5 centuries was finally unified under the feet of Ying Zheng. After the unification, an even greater challenge lay before Ying Zheng: how to govern this unprecedentedly vast empire. He undertook a series of institutional creations that would influence the next 2,000 years of history. First, believing his virtue surpassed the mythical 3 sovereigns, and his merit exceeded the legendary 5 emperors, he felt the old title of king was no longer adequate. He took the characters Huang and Di to create a completely new title, Huangdi, or emperor, and declared himself the first emperor. He also abolished the posthumous titles given to rulers by their subjects, decreed that his commands be known as edicts, and referred to himself with the royal Jin Zan. This was not just a change of name. It proclaimed the beginning of the imperial age, where the emperor's power was divine and absolute. Politically, he adopted Chancellor Li Si's advice and resolutely abolished the feudal system of enfeoffment, which had led to the division of the Zhou dynasty. He implemented the commandery Jian county system nationwide. The empire was divided into 30 Jian commanderies, with counties under them. All local governors were directly appointed by the emperor, could not pass on their posts to their sons, and power was firmly centralized. At the central level, he established a system of the 3 ducal ministers and 9 chamberlains. The chancellor handled government affairs. The grand marshal managed the military. and the Grand Censor was in charge of supervision. The three offices were clearly defined, checked each other, and were ultimately responsible to the emperor alone. Economically and culturally, he ordered the standardization of writing, making the small seal script the national standard, standardization of axle widths for carts to protect the roads, and the unification of currency, weights, and measures. These measures were like installing standardized hardware for the empire, greatly promoting economic and cultural exchange and forging a unified cultural identity for the Chinese nation. He also ordered the construction of qidao, or imperial highways, radiating from the capital Xianyang, serving as both military expressways and the empire's economic arteries. Qin Shi Huang's vision did not stop at the Central Plains. To expand his southern frontier, he launched a campaign against the Baiyue tribes of Lingnan. After an initial defeat, he ordered the construction of the Lingkou Canal, which connected the Yangtze and Pearl River systems. This water highway solved the army's logistical problems and was decisive in the final conquest of Lingnan. Subsequently, the Qin court established the Nanhai, Guilin, and Xiang commanderies and relocated hundreds of thousands of convicts, sons Jian in Jian law living with the wife's family, and merchants, as well as women, from the Central Plains to garrison the frontier and cultivate the land, living among the Yue people. This began the process of integrating Lingnan with the Central Plains. However, while Qin Shi Huang built a solid hardware for his empire, he installed a software full of bugs and viruses, his tyranny. Qin law was notoriously harsh, a system of light crimes met with heavy punishment. The Shuihudi Qin bamboo slips, unearthed in Tenjiu by Tishu Wu, show us that Qin law permeated every corner of social life. For example, the law on fields stipulated that if a person's negligence caused their cattle to become thin, they would be punished. The law on stables and parks even set feeding standards for horses. This tight social control made the people live in a state of constant fear, intellectually to suppress speech that used the past to criticize the present. He adopted Li Si's advice and created the infamous burning of books and burying of scholars. In Aryaosen BCE, he ordered the burning of privately held copies of the Book of Odes, the Book of Documents, and the writings of the 100 schools of thought. The following year, he had more than Sipailushan, violators of the prohibitions, mostly believed to be alchemists and Confucian scholars, buried alive in Xianyang. This act led to the loss of countless pre-Gen classical texts and set a vicious precedent for cultural despotism. At the same time, the Great Wall, built to defend against the northern Xiongnu, the Lishan Mausoleum, built for his own afterlife, mobilizing over Qiten laborers, and the legendary Epang Palace, archaeology confirms only its massive foundations were completed. These colossal projects exhausted the state treasury and drained the strength of the people. Heavy taxes and endless corvée labor pushed the entire society to the brink of collapse. In Ardingzhou BCE, the tightly wound string finally snapped. Chen, Shang, Wu, Guang, and Zhou Bei other conscripts were delayed by heavy rains on their way to a frontier garrison. According to Qin law, to be late is to be executed. Facing certain death, they raised the deafening cry, "Are kings and nobles born to their station?" This slogan, like a bolt of lightning, tore through the dark age of rigid hierarchy and ignited the flame in the hearts of all the oppressed. They also shouted, "Great, Chu shall rise, Chen Sheng shall be king," cleverly using the Truche people's desire to restore their homeland. A desperate mutiny by a group of soldiers quickly evolved into a nationwide rebellion against the Qin. The seemingly indestructible empire rapidly crumbled amidst the furious tide of the people's anger. Why did the Qin dynasty fall so quickly? Over a century later, the Han dynasty scholar Jia Yi gave the classic answer in his famous essay, "The Faults of Qin." Failing to rule with benevolence and righteousness, the positions of attacker and defender are reversed. Jia Yi pointed out that the logic of conquering the world is completely different from the logic of ruling it. Qin Shi Huang could use military force to attack, but after unification, facing the people of the empire, he needed to switch to defending with benevolence and righteousness. However, he continued to use the Haidian pressure tactics of wartime, ultimately losing the most fundamental foundation of rule, the hearts of the people. The historical legacy of Qin Shi Huang is twofold. The centralized system and the commandery and county system he created were inherited and modified by the subsequent Han dynasty, a policy known as Han, inheriting the Qin system. The Han learned from Qin's fall, replacing harsh legalism with the Huang and Lao school of thought, which advocated for light taxes and allowing the people to recuperate. This enabled the Han to begin its own 400-year long glorious reign. The commandery and county system, after evolving through the Dao of the Tang, the Lu of the Song, and the provinces of the Yuan, eventually laid the foundation for modern China's administrative divisions. Qin Shi Huang was a great pioneer, but a failed guardian. He unified China with the force of a thunderbolt, but failed to win the hearts of his people. He single-handedly created unity, and single-handedly planted the seeds of its destruction. His story remains an eternal mirror in history, warning every ruler who came after. Military might can conquer anything, but only a benevolent heart can make a kingdom last.